Welcome to the Orthocast. Today our guest is Robin Jorio Inokentia. She has served at Fort Ross for over 30 years, teaching on a variety of subjects from tribal people in the northwestern Pacific of the United States, including the Aleut people in Alaska, and also Russian influence in California. Because Fort Ross is one of the oldest forts in America, it was founded by the Russians, and of course they brought Orthodoxy with them. And with this, there was many saints made in America, which we're going to later talk about, since you have a real personal connection to a lot of these saints. And you know a lot that a lot of people don't know about the history of Orthodoxy in America and the history of these saints. And she's also been commissioned to do exhibitions in Russia about Saint Innocent. A really interesting story. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Kyle,
Yeah.
so much.
So my first question for you is, what was your upbringing like? What was your experiences with Christianity growing up?
Well, first of all, thank you, dear God, for this opportunity. You know, I am a California girl, so born in Fresno, raised in Sacramento. My grandparents were both ministers in Pentecostal Assembly of
Oh, wow.
God. And my grandma, even, where she was one of the first women to attend seminary and then become a minister. So I have a real strong background from my family in Christianity. And with that, you know, my family has always been I have been always very Jesus centered. It's just without every day of my life. And even though when I was growing up, it wasn't completely present, it was more so with my grandparents. And when I would visit them in the summer, you know, it was still a big part of my life. And I can say, you know, then as an adult, it has, I don't know, just never left. It's a very strong. And my parents, you know, I had a solid home upbringing, and it, you know, allows me to be me and to explore who I am. And so I've had, you know, I had a great upbringing in Christianity.
Yeah, and so how did you end up at Fort Ross? What kind of education did you have? What interested you wanting to serve at this fort?
Well, I moved over to the coast when I was young. I just 19 years old, and I got married at 20 and had my life on the coast in a very rustic lifestyle. And so being on the coast allowed me to, you know, well, I started working at Fort Ross in 1990, and it wasn't because of Fort Ross. It wasn't the history. In fact, I didn't even like history. It was more about, it was a really great position with state parks, and getting there and being a part of it, you know, through my adult years. It was my career. It was amazing, you know, to learn the history and to enjoy it and to be a part of Fort Ross when Fort Ross was really learning about itself.
Yeah.
We had, you know, in 1990, it was the fall of communism. And before that, a lot of the documents of the Russian American company were kept silent. They were hidden in libraries or in basements, and not a lot of exploration, especially when it comes to the US. So it's just really a great time at Fort Ross. And if I could just, you know, continue some of my experiences there, were, you know, surrounded by the church. And one of my first experiences with the church was a big faux pas that I made, not being Orthodox, not knowing all the rules.
Yeah.
And I am a hugger. I hug, and
Yeah.
that's the way I connect with people. So in 1990, Archbishop Anthony of San Francisco, the Western Diocese, they were coming to Fort Ross. And when he walked through the gate and I offered him a salt and bread, which was a welcoming, I also hugged him. And everyone was like, oh, you know, and I thought, what happened? And he was kind of, stiff at the moment, but then, it was okay. And we continued on and went up to the chapel. After that, he would arrive and he'd say, where is that young girl? And so it was very sweet and endearing. And I think that is what I want to say, is that all of my contacts, all of my time with the church and the clergy throughout the 30 years was lovely, was loving, was kind, was respectful to me as a state employee, a park ranger. And it was, a time where I could ask questions or, just get close to some of the clergy in just a fun way. And they would hug me. And so the next thing that I want to say was His Holiness Patriarch Alexei II arrived to Fort Ross. And before he arrived, there was an entourage that came up like 2 weeks before, and they sat down with me and they reminded me not to hug him. And it was really funny. I went, I think I got it. I learned my lesson. So that happened. But for us, it was a time of enlightenment, and, to be able to share that with the clergy was also for them, wonderful, because they were learning about the people there. When we received the reports of the cemetery and we were getting names of actual people who were buried there, I started introducing those names and asking the clergy to read those names, and it was welcomed. It was really wonderful to have that. So basically, and at Fort Ross, it's very diverse. I did education. I did academic work with people who were looking at and studying Fort Ross, and especially with Russian academics and archaeologists. And it was really, again, where we were learning so much. So going back to the clergy, one thing that I did for them is, constantly cleaning the church, and then again, feeling very welcomed by them, having meals with them. I always offered them a presentation. We always fired the cannon, which was kind of funny to me because the priests actually just loved it. And it was always fired at Fort Ross for fun anyway. So it was following that. But basically, at Fort Ross, it was, without me even knowing, I was growing in my connection to Orthodoxy. And even though people say, well, 30 years, it didn't take 30 years, really. It was there, it was in me. And again, I was always Christ-centered. So being with the clergy just felt like at home.
Yeah.
And it was very comfortable for me.
Yeah. And so you're teaching there, you're doing all these different things here. You're working with, different the US government, the Russian government, you're meeting, clergy in the Russian church, and they're making like a good influence on you. And so what was your favorite part about learning about Fort Ross? Because I believe it's very old, like founded in the 1700s.
Yeah, Fort Ross has an amazing history in California, but also for the US, because it really is outside of Alaska, the only outpost for Russian presence. And it really kind of ties and unites America today and Russia today. And that should never be forgotten. We are a part of Russia in that history. Yeah. And Russia doesn't forget either that we are a part of Russia here with this history. And so, keeping up with academic work and being invited to present to Russia and in Paris, as you mentioned, with UNESCO. But mostly my time in Russia, and I've been there now over 19 times.
Wow.
Many times by invitation from the Russian Academy of Sciences, and then also projects that I worked on with the Kashaya people Those are the native peoples of that land. And so Fort Ross, it goes to from 1812 to 1841, if anyone wants a date.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
30 years. That's it.
You continue to like learn about all of this, and you're going to Russia and you're doing all these different projects. And so when did it click that you wanted to become Orthodox? Like being around it, you identified as a Christian, and you knew about Orthodoxy, or did you know about Orthodoxy growing up, or was it just Fort Ross that?
Yeah, no, I did not know about Orthodoxy. It wasn't a part of my lexicon. It was not even a thought. I, again, grew up in Assembly of God, and that was what I knew about Christianity. And even then, as a young girl, what do you get from all that?
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question, because if you talk to kids today, like, what are they getting out of church? I think that's a big question. What do they take home? And it's hard for me to know, other than I know that Jesus was there, and that, he saved us. And so it's pretty basic in that way. And so when I think about Fort Ross, and I think about who I am then, working there, certainly my ethos, who I was, just wanting to be loving and kind to all people and all religion, of Christianity. It was just natural to get close to the church.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's jumping a little bit, but it actually was very natural for me when I did get baptized. And, there's other things that I want to say about the church at Fort Ross. And when I think about who they are and the clergy, and how they, we're friends, but they're not really friends. They're clergy, and they have they have a reverence, and a respect that I have, and having personal conversations with them, and they're answering questions in such a loving way. They never made me feel like I was out of place, even though I could stand in the church and be with them. And it was like, please come in, please.
Yeah.
So, I never felt like left out. And however, they never also asked me, why don't you join us? Why don't you become Orthodox? Why don't you, why aren't you? And that would also probably make me feel bad, I guess, in a way, for someone to push me. And they never, ever did. And I'm grateful for that, because it was truly my will, and it was God's will, not mine. I feel very grateful to all the priests and the clergy and the parishioners, the matushkas, and, the time there, the old ladies, having conversations with them, and they left Russia. They fled Russia, and they basically would sit with me and invite me to eat with them. And I just felt like a part of something big, like, wow.
Yeah.
When I would talk about Saint Innocent and learn about him, certainly I would read the word Saint Innocent. But for me, in my language, it was Father Ion Vitaminov. And now I would never say that. I would always say Saint Innocent.
Yeah.
So I've learned a lot, but he is an amazing person. And I think when I would learn about him and then share it with the clergy, or in everyday conversation every day at Fort Ross about the church, it became in me. It was like Saint Innocent whispering to me for 30 years.
Wow.
And that is like, I look back at that and I just like, wow. Wow. And it brought me a lot of peace during my time at Fort Ross to be able to talk about the church in such a positive way. And I want to say this here, because the orthodoxy that was brought in to Alaska and to California was something that was actually protecting the rights of people who
Mm-hmm.
were employees of the Russian American company. And when I could talk about the church, I could talk very lovingly about them and
Mm-hmm.
kindly, where some of my colleagues in state parks, when they would talk about the missions, it was rough.
Yeah.
The mission system. So there was a comparison for me, and something that I felt, again, very fond of Orthodoxy and who they were and how they treated people in the colonies and how they protected, or brought in food or clothing or medicines, and also brought them to God.
Yeah.
I mean, that's wonderful, amazing. And I think that that is really critical to who I am, is that I was able to take in Orthodoxy in such an amazing way. So I'm not even Orthodox yet,
Yeah.
at this moment when
Yeah.
I'm working there.
Yeah.
And I was told that, my position was going to end after 30 years. And it was a rough time, very rough, because I wasn't quite ready. And, I was at that point for the last 7 years, I was living actually at the fort. I would walk the beach every day. And this is where, I think that with connection, miracles and things that happen, it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
And even then, not being Orthodox, but I was walking on the beach in the morning, as I always do and did before work when I was living there. And I, again, had maybe another couple weeks of working there. And so I was in tears a lot. I was just thinking
Yeah.
about my life and my time at Fort Ross, and so grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting ready to leave the beach, and I decided to turn around and just, again, with gratitude, say thank you. And I saw a little something across the creek, and I was like, I thought it was trash. And I thought, I cannot leave trash on the beach if I see it. So
Yeah.
I knew I had to cross the creek, and we had big storms. So I actually really had to hop across the creek in my rain boots. And I got closer, and I saw, this object, this thing, and it was poking out of the sand, and it just caught my eye. I get closer, and I said, oh my gosh, that looks like a painting.
Yeah.
And I get closer, and I uncover it, and it's an icon of St. Peter the Alute.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
How did this, why is it here? And what happened? And why?
Yeah.
Why?
Uh-huh.
And it was pretty amazing to find this
Yeah.
on the beach. And I am very close to the monastery in Calistoga, Holy Assumption.
Mm-hmm.
And I called Mother Melania, the abbess, and when I carried it up, called her, and I said, I need to tell you what just happened. And I told her, and she goes, oh my gosh, can you bring it?
Yeah.
And I said, yes, after work. And she goes, so I brought it to her, and she had asked me, does it bring me comfort? Because again, I was in a lot of tears.
Yeah.
And I said, oh yes, oh my gosh. And we were both amazed. And then the other sisters, the nuns, came over and also venerated it. And then in a couple of weeks, we had it actually a moleben for it in the church with Father Lawrence in Santa Rosa. The icon today is at the monastery, and it has an amazing history to it. And one of my dear brothers, I was giving a presentation in Sacramento, and I had brought the icon and into Father Paul's church at Holy Assumption, and it was, been there for like a month, and it was the last day that I was going to give the presentation on St. Peter, not about the icon, but about St. Peter. And it was a way to connect people to him more. And I was giving the presentation, and right afterwards, a man walked up, and I could tell that he was Native, and he he was very emotional. It felt, and Father Paul and I were putting it actually in the car, and he said, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you. And his ancestors were, St. Peter was tortured down in San Gabriel Mission. And there's a story to that, which I would love to share. I just don't think we're in time. But the story is, he's basically the first martyr outside of Alaska. St. Juvenali is the first martyr of North America. But he was martyred. And so I'm standing at the car with Father Paul, and he says, my ancestors, I'm Shumash, they're the ones who tortured him. And we're like, what? Wait, what? And it was very, again, emotional for all of us. And he said, I just need to touch this and know that, I'm sorry, and repent and forgiveness. And that happened.
Wow.
So he wasn't Orthodox at that moment.
Yeah.
He also was not. And Peter the Alute, the icon, brought him to Orthodoxy.
Wow.
And he is now Peter. That's his name.
Wow. That's
and so, it's just a wonderful connection. And then the artist, actually, I found out that how this came to be on the beach.
Yeah.
And I do want to share it. I'll just try to a couple minutes. He's an artist from Kodiak. He's Unangam. And he was invited to participate in an art show in Berkeley. And he did that icon. And he carved it. He created it. His girlfriend at the moment was Shumash, which are the ones that had tortured Peter.
Wow.
So that connection. And he wanted to highlight this story about one of his ancestors. And the show was over. And in his tradition, you burn your art. No one else needs to have it. He brought it to Fort Ross, to the beach. He drove from Berkeley to there alone and tried to burn it, and it wouldn't burn.
Wow.
It would not burn. And he told us the story at the monastery, because we all got together to share the story of St. Peter the Alute and this icon, but also just his story. And he told us, he said, I made a fire, everything was burning, the wood I was putting on was burning, and then I put the icon on and it won't burn.
Wow.
And, it's pretty amazing. So he decided to throw it into the water. And that was months and months before I had washed back up and I had found it.
Yeah.
And actually, I want to say, a lot of clergy have said, you did not find the icon, St. Peter found you. And thank God I found it, because if someone else had found it, they may not have known what it was, or not have had the reverence for this. So Fort Ross, it's an amazing place. And so I can move on from Fort Ross. I want to say too, it's Holy Land. Saint Innocent was there. St. Peter first was there. He left the shores of Fort Ross before he was martyred in Santa Barbara, Ballet area. St. Innocent was there. St. Tikhon was there. St. Sebastian was there, Serbian Orthodox. Yeah. And then St. John, San Francisco and Shanghai and San Francisco was there. So 5 saints have walked there. And people should go. People should know this story and know the stories of this amazing place.
Yeah, exactly. And don't they have a service there every year around Memorial Day?
There are 2 services, one on Memorial Day, mostly Rocor, and then on July 4th, the OCA. But the OCA, that particular service is the very, 100 years ago, let me back up. In 1925, after the Russians had left and the church hadn't been used, 1925, the Orthodox Church came in and started having liturgies there. And that's July 4th. And that's what continues today. And next year will be 100 years of divine liturgy at Fort Ross. And we're going to do a big celebration on that.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of crazy thing happens at the end of your tenure at Fort Ross.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a miracle story. So what did you do next after?
Yeah, I didn't know what to do after that, really. I mean, my time ended at Fort Ross. I kind of let go of everything about Fort Ross for about a year. It was very hard. And of course, I made many visits over to the monastery and would hang out with them. And then, too, if there was an opportunity to talk about St. Peter the Alute, and for me, it's like I'm a missionary. I don't know if disciple is the right word for St. Innocent and St. Peter, but that's how I feel. It's like that is my mission in life, is to share the story of St. Peter the Alute and St. Innocent, because I can ask people who are Orthodox who have never been to Fort Ross and they live in California, and I'm like, what? And then I get to share the stories. But I continued on after that with projects with Russia, and with however I could stay connected. And then also serve St. Innocent and St. Peter. I'm not Orthodox yet, but it was important to me to stay connected. And, like I said, I've been over to Russia over 19 times now, even before visiting churches, and even the oldest church in Russia in Novograd. At least I'm told it's the oldest, and you could take pictures of the frescoes on the wall without flash, and I have that. And I look back on that, and I think it was also formative time. After Fort Ross, in 2019, I was invited by the Ministry of Culture of the East of Irkutsk. And also my friends who have a club called Fort Ross Irkutsk Club, who I have known and hosted for 25 years at that time. And they said, yes, please come. We'd love to have you. And just to keep it short, when I got there, we went around, we toured around, we did different things, went to Lake Baikal. That was great. And then they said, we have a surprise for you. We're going to take you to Anga. And I said, well, what's Anga? Where's Anga? And they go, well, that's the birthplace of St. Innocent. And I'm like, oh, wow, right. And so it's a 4-hour drive on a bumpy road. It was pretty rough getting there. We get there and we have a meal, get settled into our rooms. There's a brand new, as of 2017, so this is now just 2 years old in 2019, called the Spiritual and Education Center of Saint Innocent. And again, in his birth town. And they redid the church where he had served. They have all these little museum buildings, and then one bigger museum. And then they have a spiritual center where you can stay. And we were welcome to stay there. And the director came, gave us a tour, toured through the big museum. And then I noticed that, again, my mission, Fort Ross, there was no mention on the walls of Fort Ross. It was on the map on the floor. But I'm like, we plan on doing that. And they're like, yeah, you can. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not an exhibit planner. I can't do that, but I can help you raise money. And it was decided that that's what I would do. I came home, I talked to Father Paul, and he said, yeah, let's talk to Archbishop Perel. And we did. And I also have talked to Archbishop Benjamin. I know them. I have connection with them in that I can text them and tell them what
Wow.
I'm doing. And they agreed because they knew that unless they both gave the same amount, I wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
And they were both the OCA and ROCOR involved. And that's just how I work because Fort Ross was not ROCOR, it wasn't OCA,
Yeah.
needs to be both. And for 2 years, we put together basically, I did it, an exhibit of St. Innocent. And I had sent many documents to them and items, and they were only going to do a temporary exhibit on Fort Ross in the hallway. And instead, because it was so much, we had done so much, they made a permanent exhibit
Wow.
of Fort Ross. And it's really gorgeous. It's well done and it's still there and it will always be there. And so that happened. But on that visit, it was without me knowing it. When we went to open up the exhibit, we went in 2021,
Mm-hmm.
2 years. It was actually a pilgrimage,
Yeah.
and I didn't know that it was going to be a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
And with me came three priests and the two Matushkas and Mother Macrina. There were seven of us, and it was just a most amazing trip. That's, what changed my life is, and I've taken, every time I go to Russia, generally I take a group.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's really challenging. It can be
Yeah.
someone has a meltdown.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't right, but honestly, with this group and these priests, we were laughing all the time. We were having so much fun. It was so lighthearted and it was so clean and pure and everything was just amazing. And the priests had all the permissions to serve in these churches, and you get the permissions from the diocese that you're visiting. And they handled that part. I handled everything else. And afterwards of one liturgy, after His Eminence Metropolitan Maximilian had walked into the church in his vestments, I guess that's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was just like, oh my gosh, it's just a holy man. And
Wow.
it was amazing. He invited us to a feast and after the service. And actually it was just a beautiful, beautiful service because I was watching priests that I've known for 30 years to be serving in this church. And
Yeah.
we went to the feast, and now I say Vladika. He asked me to sit next to him, and I did. And I had Misha as my interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing. And he asked me to tell him more stories about Saint Innocent
Mm-hmm.
and of Fort Ross. And I told him a lot. And I asked him a question, and the table got very quiet. There was about 24 of us or so
Yeah.
at the table. His diocese hierarchs and our group. And I said, well, what do you do when you're not serving? What do you do for fun? And he looked at me like, whoa, what? Oh, okay. And because he was asking me questions, I said, well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Out of respect, I'm just
Yeah.
wondering.
Uh-huh.
And he showed me different pictures from his phone, fishing and singing, at the campfire, or, just different moments that he has in his life. And I just said, wow, that's amazing. And then Misha said, she should tell you more about Fort Ross and actually about the icon she found.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't going to. I had no intention. I usually never don't
Yeah.
talk about it much. It's not something you go around
Mm-hmm.
talking about. And I thought, no, and he said, yeah, tell me about it. And I told him, and he did Table got quiet again. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget it. He said, you have all these saints around you. Why aren't you Orthodox? Why aren't you? And I was like, oh, hard to answer. No one's ever really asked, really. And I said, well, Your Eminence, I'm a good Christian woman, and I don't know that I'll be a good Orthodox woman. And he was like, wow, okay, what does that mean? And I go, I don't know. I just know that you have a ton of rules. You have a lot of rules in Orthodoxy. He goes, yeah, that's true. But he said, don't worry about them. You'll learn as you go through. And I go, okay, well, it's just a, thought. And I said, besides, the priests here, and they were listening because no one had asked me, and they were waiting for my answer because they'd been wanting to ask me. Father Stefan said, wanting to ask you for 25 years. And I said, the priests here know me as me, Robin from Fort Ross, and they hug me, and I would miss that. And he thought, wow, again, he said, no, you can continue hugging them. And he stood up and he hugged me. Aww. He had me stand up. And he said, you can hug her. And I thought, okay, well, that's very sweet. And I said, I don't know. I can't give you an answer right now. I'll pray about it. Yeah. And he said, fair enough. Fair enough. So in 2 days, we met again at a feast. And that was September 7th in the evening. And I had, with Matushka Helen and Father George, went and bought my cross, and I showed it to him. And he says, oh, okay. And he said, when? And we didn't even say the word baptism. He just said, okay, when? And he's sitting, maybe 4 people away from me at the table. And I said, I don't know, maybe, how about tomorrow? I mean, we should just do this. And he's like, okay, so tomorrow. And sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
So Father Maxim got up from the table, went and made phone calls to get it set up. We met in the lobby the next morning at 7 a.m. But before that, Father Stefan came to my door early, like at 6:30. And so hold on. Anyway, he said, I need to talk to you. This is serious. And again, it made me cry and think about this. And he says, you have a lot to think about and know, you need to have your lifetime confessions. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And here's the thing about that is I've never been a catechumen. I was never.
Yeah.
So I didn't know all the rules. Again, rules. I'm like, okay, here's the first rule. And it was a very serious moment that I had with him. He is my godfather now too. Wow. So we went to the river and I was baptized with my group, and his diocese were all there. It was just pretty amazing. And I was in the water with Father Maxim, but Metropolitan did all the service. And it's just, I don't know, you can't be more solid, and it was like, if not now, when?
Yeah.
Now, St. Innocent's been talking to me for 30 years. Okay, this is it.
Yeah.
On his birthday, in his hometown, in the river he was baptized in. And it couldn't have been more perfect for me. And my first communion was in the church that he was in as a young boy. Wow. So with the service of the Metropolitan there and the other dioceses. So, yeah, it was pretty amazing. And so when I think about my life now and who I am and who I've become, I cannot tell you how free I feel and how at home I am being Orthodox. It's just complete. There's just no question. And it's not like you think that you have to, like, you're in a religion, like you have to figure it out. I don't have to figure anything out. God's got this.
Yeah.
And I have, freedom in that with, my life and my decisions that God absolutely showed me everything and presented all this to me. So in different ways. And it's pretty amazing, to finally be at home. And that's exactly, what a lot of the parishioners and clergy said when I had my first communion at Fort Ross. They said, "Welcome home. We've been waiting." And so it's glory to God for everything. And it's amazing for me.
Yeah, no, it's a truly amazing story and about, patience and providence of like, it was always around you, but then it just, the perfect moment, everything was leading up to that moment, being, baptized there, where this saint who's probably praying for you in heaven, leading you in his hometown.
Yeah, when I was at Fort Ross for all those years, the way that you enter into the fort is through the church.
Wow. Wow.
And so every day, my part of who I am has been grateful and having gratitude to everything in life, and every day, being grateful. And I say those things out loud, even, with my children. What are you grateful for today? And being in church and walking through the chapel, I said prayers. I was an Orthodox, but I said my prayers there every day. So it was there. How could Saint Innocent not hear me?
Yeah.
And how could I not hear him and know, and Saint Peter?
Yeah. Wow. And so, speaking about Saint Peter, what is his story?
He is Unangam. He is from Kodiak. He's actually, so the word Aleut actually is a generic word for a native Alaskan, but it also can mean the Aleutian Islands.
Yeah.
Although the Russian American company used it for everybody in some ways. And so he's Kodiak, and if I could pray to God and have that miracle, he would become St. Peter the Kodiak, not the Aleut.
Yeah.
But he was, we think 15, but the company rules are that you have to be 18 to work with the company. And we know that being a Kodiak and in that territory at that time with St. Herman, that even though the records are not clear, and I do have every intention of researching more about St. Peter and if he was actually, there's a baptism record.
Yeah.
But even, I've had clergy tell me, even if it wasn't St. Herman himself, it was the clergy that St. Herman had taught, or known. So he was baptized. He was Orthodox. His name before is very difficult to say, but it's Chunanganang. And I can't say it again. He became Peter, and he again was a hunter for the company. Many young men in Alaska and the Southwest were working for the company. And he had come to Fort Ross. He was there, and we don't know how long he was there, but he was taken on a ship with 24 other hunters. And this was normal. This would happen whenever there was a ship available to take hunters down south to hunt sea otter. And he was one of 24 on this hunting party. And the hunting party was released into some of them in a longboat and their kayaks in the bay near San Gabriel. And the bigger boat got a hole and they went ashore on this like area. And the Spanish soldiers came and said, why are you here? You know, it's illegal for you to be hunting in our waters. And they said, look, we're not even hunting. We're just fixing our boat. And we would like to could you give us a couple days? And the soldiers said yes. But instead, they came the next day with more and rounded them up. And in that roundup, Peter must have fought them because he had a gash on his head already. They were taken to the mission into a cell, and they were separated. Only 2 Native Alaskans were in one particular cell. The others were in other areas, and eventually, like a couple days later, were taken to Santa Barbara to be then released for pay. But they kept these 2 back, and they kept trying to get Peter to convert. And it's an interesting story to me because how do you talk to someone who doesn't speak Spanish? He probably did not speak Russian. He probably only spoke his native language. But you can use gestures, you know, and he refused. And he did refuse verbally. And his friend who was with him, I don't know about friend, but the person with him knows that he said, my faith lies with God. I'm Orthodox. And they tortured him and to prove their point to the other, to convert Kugliak. And he, you know, the torture was brutal without going into details. It was just, you know, horrific. And of course he died. And what's amazing, and most people don't know, and because, so here's the thing about this whole story is that there's an old story that he was at San Francisco or he was at the Monterey area. He was never there. And I've been sharing this with some of the hierarchs in the churches and sharing with them the research documents that are truthful, the primary sources of here's what happened, here's what he said, here's what his friend said on 3 different accounts. This is the story. This is where he was. And so what happened is that the moment he died, Kugliak said the door opened to the cell and there was a note handed to the soldier. And the note said, they're going to be released. They're being paid by the Russian American company is going to pay for their release. Stop what you're doing. So think about it. Peter at that moment was working with God to save the others. The moment.
Wow.
And then what the soldier officer said is, oh my gosh, well, get rid of Peter, throw him out, not even bury him. He's not buried anywhere. And that's the other thing. People, oh, where is he buried? He's not buried. No one knows where he's at.
Wow.
He's at that place. And so that's his story. And that's what happened. And Kugliak actually was able to escape after probably, it says weeks being held captive. But he escaped to an island. He lived there. And then he was rescued by actually the same ship that had brought them down and taken to Fort Ross. And he told his story to Ivan Kuskov, who was the manager at Fort Ross. And anyone here who's listening who wants the research papers about St. Peter, I can share them. I can share anything you want about St. Peter or St. Innocent or Fort Ross or the Orthodoxy, but
Mhm.
Basically, it's an amazing story. And I think that's what I am happy. Thank you, dear God, for my time at Fort Ross, that I could learn these stories and share these stories with now Orthodox people, so that we're all learning our history. Because if you live in California or if you live in North America, you are connected to Fort Ross. Think about that. That's the first Orthodox church in North America outside of Alaska. It's super amazing. It's right here. And, it's Holy Land as well. So the stories that are there, people should know. This is your basic Orthodox history in North America. And yes, it was Russian, and it came, in 1794 into Alaska by the Valon monks, 10 monks. Saint Juvenali was one of them. Saint Herman was another. So, and Saint Innocent, I just read somewhere that he was there for 5 months. No, he was there for 5 weeks. And he wrote down every little detail about his everyday at Fort Ross, which is amazing, because he talks about the baptisms and the children coming to sing with him at the steps of the church. And that makes me cry, because think about that. I mean, wow. It's a church that we still go into. It has been reconstructed, but it's the same location, same thing. And St. Innocent was there. And the creek, the creek down there, Sandy Creek, Fort Ross Creek, he baptized people in. That's a holy place. And, I'm so happy to share those stories about St. Peter and St. Innocent.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing those. I think everyone should know, especially like Orthodox people in America, is that there is a history very early on of Orthodox Christianity in the West Coast, in America, in Alaska. And a great production that recently came out is Sacred Alaska. Do you want to talk a little bit about that movie? Because I think that really did a good job of highlighting the Alaskan Orthodoxy and like sharing their experiences with, Saint Innocent.
Yeah, I think that when we think about Alaska, we think it's so far away, and it's actually, again, so connected to Orthodoxy. And again, people forget that that is the beginning of Orthodoxy in North America, and with those monks. And, again, me talking about St. Innocent never gets old. I hope it doesn't for anybody. But he put the Yupik language, he created an alphabet so that he could actually then share the Gospels and the liturgy in Yupik language with the Yupik now priests, people who were becoming Orthodox. And so that's one example of just pure love. I mean, that was a lot of work, and working with the local native peoples. And the thing with Orthodoxy in Alaska, and they talk about this in the film, is, again, the church was there protecting their rights against the Russian American company that was quite brutal. And, that is like, oh, thank you to God for this. And Sacred Alaska highlights that. It highlights the monks. It highlights, of course, Saint Herman and Saint Juvenali, Saint Jacob. It highlights Saint Innocent. And certainly there are others there as well. And now we have Saint Matushka Olga, although people say you don't need to say Matushka, just Saint Olga of Alaska. And her simplicity, her life as a simple person, just loving and giving. And, all of the saints are just examples for us. Exactly. And Sacred Alaska highlights that, and who the Alaskan people are today in the Orthodox world. And certainly they have their struggles. But the idea is that Sacred Alaska is bringing the attention of Orthodoxy to all of us, and the beginnings of Orthodoxy. So I thought to myself, wow, we have been wanting Father Michael Alexa, who proposed
Mhm.
4 months ago, maybe now. He was actually going to go with me this year to Irkutsk. It was the last place that he had not been where St. Innocent had been, and Yakutsk. And he was going to go. And we were going to raise the money for him. And when Sacred Alaska came out and I thought about it, I thought, okay, this is a way that I could actually raise funds for the priests of Alaska. And so I talked to first the blessing of Father Paul, and then this is something that I've learned as well too. Get all the blessings before
Yeah.
and then the blessing of Bishop Alexei. And he's like, yes. And then I talked to the director and I told him the intent of bringing the film to Sacramento and then to Santa Rosa is to raise funds for the priests. And he says, great, I want to come out. I want to help you. So he did. And we've raised enough. We are getting close. I still need to raise more funds for them, but my commitment is for 3 priests. And what's amazing about it is, well, first of all, they don't have even a passport. 2 of them have never been outside of Alaska. And so we're doing this. We're going on this pilgrimage in September, and it's becoming settled, and everything's falling into place. And here's the miracle in it is that they're going to read the liturgy in Anga, and Irkutsk, in Yupik. They're bringing it back to St. Innocent, where he was born, where he served, and they're giving it to him. And then last year, when I had brought the Gospels over, I had met the Bishop Kirill, the hierarch of the Holy Trinity St. Sergius Lavra outside of Moscow. And he is so excited too, because they're going to also say and read the liturgy in front of the relics of St. Innocent. Wow. And so if I can give, the glory to God for all of it, and if I can honor St. Innocent, this is, the work. This is what is before me, which God has put on my plate. Yeah. And I want to make happen. So Sacred Alaska, everyone should see it. Everyone.
Learning about St. Innocent, St. Peter, I think their stories are so amazing, and it shows how we should, bring the Orthodox faith to different cultures and people, and, asking for their prayers, because, it's just learning about their stories and like how holy they are, and seeing how much, even on an individual level, like what they've done in your life. Like, yeah, it's truly amazing. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to
thank you.
Share your story. If anyone has any questions, please comment them below, and maybe we could do a part 2. There's not a lot of information about kind of these topics online, so please, anyone, comment if you have questions. But thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Kyle, so much.